So, obviously, when the English, who are already there, see people from the Netherlands moving in, it becomes a threat to them. And this happened from the beginning. And from New Amsterdam, we said that the Dutch controlled the trade of 3 vital rivers, the Hudson River Valley, the Connecticut River Valley, and the Delaware River Valley. And which one was especially valuable to the Dutch, Courtney, of those 3?
The Hudson.
The Hudson. And it provided a great route through the Great Lakes, and it covered the entire interior region of the continent. So it was a very good river for transportation. Now, somebody else controlled the Hudson River, Soraya, that the Dutch had to make sure they got along with, and that was the Iroquois Indians. Did they develop a friendly relationship with them? They did. So the Dutch were able to trade freely, not only with the Iroquois, but also use that waterway to trade with other colonies and countries. Well, in 1643, the English colonies began to fear 2 things. Milo, what was one?
Dutch expansion.
Dutch expansion. And what was the other one, Talon? Possible Indian raids. And so as a result, there were some colonies that got together and they united their military forces. The colonies were Massachusetts, Plymouth, Connecticut, and New Haven. And they all got together and united their military forces. And this united stand of military forces was called what, Hannah? The New England Confederation. And it was a political league that stated that individual members, in other words, individual colonies, retained the power of governing their own colonies locally, but this New England Confederation would be a central body of government that would take care of what? The defense of the colonies, or the military. So there's 2 different things. So this New England Confederation united the military, but don't think that the New England Confederation controlled local government in Massachusetts, or Hartford, or Plymouth. They still controlled their own local governments, but they all worked together controlling the defense of those colonies, or the military. Now, finally, in 1664, a showdown occurred between the Dutch and English, when an English colonial fleet dared to come into the Hudson River. So in 1664, we got a showdown between the English and the Dutch, when an English military fleet has the gall to sail into the Hudson River. So what happens? What? Say it. Well, they get mad, then what happens? They blasted away and all this, man. I'll tell you, it was a battle of the century, lives lost, most bloody battle in the history of our country falls. The Dutch looked at that English fleet and went, uh-oh. And they exited America without a shot being fired. So all it took was the presence of the English military ships in the face of the Dutch military ships for the Dutch to figure out, uh-oh, we're overwhelmed here by a much superior military. We'll kindly get the hell out of here before we have a conflict. Not a shot fired. And that's how fast the Dutch got knocked out of the middle colonies.
The English came up to Hudson. Where did they go?
They just left the country.
Going home?
Yeah, pretty much. I'll tell you that in our next subtopic. But the Dutch presence in the middle colonies wasn't long. Now, will they come back or not? We'll see. So that takes us to our next subtopic, which will make sense with this last comment, which is New York and New Jersey. Okay, the formation of those colonies. New York and New Jersey. Well, once this showdown happened on the Hudson River, who owns all of the New Netherlands? The British, right. Now, the king at the time was King Charles II. King Charles II. And what he did is he gave all the territory that had been New Netherland to his brother, who was younger, by the way, James. So after this showdown in the Hudson River, in which the Dutch said, oh, we've had enough, we're out of here, King Charles II gave all of that land that was once called New Netherland to his younger brother James. So this vast property became owned by a 30-year-old brother of the king called James, Duke of York. Okay? That's what his position was in England. So after this showdown in the Hudson River, British King Charles II presented all the territory that had once been New Netherland to his younger brother James. And so as a result, this vast territory became the property of the 30-year-old James, the Duke of York. So he gave the name New York to the territory, and then he started giving some of this land to his friends. It's a giveaway here. So James gave the name New York to this territory that used to be the New Netherland. And once he renamed it New York, he began to hand out generous gifts of land to his friends. He had two friends he really liked, Lord John Berkeley and Sir George Carteret. And he gave them a big sum of land, which we know today as New Jersey. Poor buggers. Anyway, so James gave the name New York to this territory that was given to him by his brother, King Charles II, called it New York, and he began to hand out gifts to his friends. Two of his friends he gave land to were Lord John Berkeley and Sir George Carteret, and he gave them the land we know today as New Jersey. Now let's talk about New Jersey, because we've talked quite a bit about New York, really, haven't we? It was called what? New Amsterdam. Well, in 1664, this is about the same time we had the showdown between the British and the Dutch, New Jersey was almost all Indian land. There were only a few hundred white settlers there that were just kind of there on their own. Most of New Jersey was occupied by Indians. Just a very few hundred white settlers in that area. Well, Berkeley and Carteret tried to attract more settlers. Didn't have very good luck. So finally in 1772, actually after New Jersey changed hands many times, what does that mean? This car I have has changed hands several times. Sold and bought many times, or given away many times. So, I want you to think about this. It could be t-shirt material for those who don't have a t-shirt. This could be a t-shirt question. So if you have a t-shirt, don't answer even if you know it. So, by 1702, after New Jersey changed hands several times, what was the solution to the problem? Because they couldn't get people to move there. Yes, Miss Cottrell. Do you have a t-shirt?
No.
Okay.
You said two different things.
Yeah. 1772 and then
1702.
Okay, I was like, that's a long time.
Yeah, we're glad we beat you clear through the revolution. Oh, not quite. Anyway, so by 1702, New Jersey had changed hands several times. So what was, and nobody would go to settle there much because it was full of Indians, just a few white settlers. What was the solution to the problem? And if you can answer this and you don't have a t-shirt already, I'll give you one. What? Just the opposite. What happened to this area of land we know as New Jersey in 1702 after Berkeley and Carteret couldn't get anybody to come there and it changed hands several times? Do you have a t-shirt? Okay, go ahead.
Did they give up?
They did give up, but what happened? Well, that's close. Think about that. They didn't sell it.
Did the Indians kick them out?
What?
Did the Indians kick them out?
Nope.
They gave it to the Indians.
Have we ever succumbed to Indians anything in our life? Come on, what happened with Henry? I know you're going to get this because you were close. Because we couldn't get anybody to go there, it just turned over several times, whatever became of New Jersey. Before it became, all right, before it became a state, whatever happened. You? Sell it back to them. Hell, we never bought it from them. Well, sell your own land, though. I guess he's doing that. If we get into Native Americans, you'll believe that. Anybody? What? that you're on that, aren't you? Gracie?
They just like force all these.
What'd you say?
Didn't they buy it from maybe?
No, we wouldn't do that.
No.
5, 4, yes.
Did they just like leave it and not even go there anymore?
No, that's good guess. These are all good guesses.
Kick Indians off.
No, they made it a royal colony under the direction of England. Yeah. Okay. So finally, in 1702, after these lands had changed hands many times, the King of England claimed New Jersey and made it a royal colony under English rule. Okay?
How about we close?
Well, I don't like to ruin self-esteem by saying, "Oh, you're kidding me." Okay, any questions on that? Yes, Brooke? Okay, let's move on to the domination of New York and New England by King James II. Because have we settled anything really south of New York yet? In the middle colonies? Not really. We've settled New York and New Jersey, and of course the New England colonies, right? Massachusetts Bay Colony and Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, those are all settled, right? Okay, so we're still talking about kind of New Jersey and New York up. So the domination of New York and New England by King James II.
Wait, so was New Jersey renamed New England?
No, New England actually is Massachusetts.
Oh,
and not much. No, it's still called New Jersey.
So the James we were talking about before, that you did.
Yeah.
That first James we were talking about was King James.
First.
No, that was James the Duke of York. But Malter, you're right there. What King James have we talked about so far? The first, right? This is the second. Where'd he come from?
Well, I was just. So we can skip generations.
Well, Malter's got to move. Okay. Okay, listen. The colony of New York had a much different history than that of New Jersey. And we're going to talk about the domination of New York and New England. Are we talking about New Jersey?
No.
Okay. Okay, James the Duke of York, not to be confused with King James I, but soon to be confused with King James II. King James I, okay, James the Duke of York.
Whoa.
Okay, just listen. James the Duke of York, not to be confused with King James I, but soon to be confused with King James II.
Okay, you should like.
Start over.
Oh my goodness. There we go. Same person.
James, the Duke of York, was a very harsh ruler. Remember, he owned the area called New Netherland, right? And he changed it to New York. He was a harsh ruler, James, the Duke of York. And he levied taxes on the people without their consent. So James, the Duke of York, was a harsh ruler. Thus the subtopic, the domination of New York and New England by King James II. But anyway, James, the Duke of York, was a very harsh ruler. He levied very heavy taxes without the consent of the people. He didn't allow the people to have any voice in the government. And I'll be damned, in 1685 he went from James, the Duke of York, to what? King James II. So, again, the colony of New York had a much different history than that of New Jersey. James, the Duke of York, was a very harsh ruler. He levied taxes without the consent of the people. He didn't allow the people any voice in the government. And in 1685, the Duke of York becomes King James II of England. So we have a new ruler, King James II, formerly James, Duke of York.
So now he's king, he controls all of this.
Well, he does. And this is kind of interesting what he does. So, when does he become king? 1685. In 1686, a year later, he combined New Jersey, New York, and the colonies in New England under a form of government called the Domination of New England. So 1 year later, in 1686, King James II combined New Jersey, New York, and New England under a single form of government he called the Domination of New England. Actually, it's the Dominion of New England. It's the Dominion of New England.
Wait, it says domination.
Yeah. Thank you.
Wait, so it was
Isn't that on your ID sheet?
No, it says domination. What are you doing?
It is domination. Sorry.
What's going on?
I don't know.
My brain.
What's domination?
What do you want to be?
Dominion.
Okay.
Are we writing this for?
Okay. We'll say Dominion, because that's actually what it is.
How do you spell down?
How do you spell dominion? See,
Now, the domination of New York and New England by King James II is correct,
Iowa.
but the name of the government was the what? Dominion of New England. Thank you. Okay, a little confusion there. Now, how do you think he ruled this new government? Harshly, levying taxes, not giving him any say. Because of that, it only lasted 2 years, as citizens in England resented his harsh rule as well. So he was a hardcore dude, and he not only alienated the people in America, he also alienated his own people back in England. Now, what happens normally when people are a little tired of their ruler? They have a revolt. And that happened in 1688. In 1688, a revolt occurred in England, and it drove King James II from the throne. So not only was he irritating with this harsh rule of people living in America, in New York, New Jersey, and New England, he also was irritating the people who lived back home in the mother country. And as a result of that, in 1688, a revolt occurred in England that drove King James II from the throne. And I'll be darned if the next year in 1689, England didn't adopt a Bill of Rights. Very good. So let's kind of go back so we're not confused, just so you can get through your notes. The colony of New York had a much different history from that of New Jersey. James the Duke of York was a harsh ruler who levied heavy taxes without consent of the people. The Duke did not allow the people any voice in the government, and in 1685 he became King James II of England. 1 year later, in 1686, he combined New Jersey, New York, and New England colonies under one form of government called the Dominion of New England. And it only lasted 2 years because citizens not only in America, but also back in the mother country were sick of his rule. And finally, in 1688, a revolt occurred, driving him from the throne. And a year later, in 1689, England adopted for the first time a Bill of Rights. And who was the new king that restored the colonial charters and the representative assemblies in the colonies? William I. So what William I is, when he took over for King James II, what are assemblies again? Legislative bodies that were obviously worthless and had no control during King James II, right? Well, when William I took over, he ended that. He restored all the colonial charters that had been given before and honored them, and gave each colony's assembly their power back as far as the government goes. So he made good hay, so to speak, in the colonies after a very harsh ruler in King James II was ousted. Okay, so we've got the problem solved in the upper middle colonies. What do you want, Brooke? I'll say it.
Well, I don't know.
You restored all.
You restored all the charters and what?
All the charters. You know all these charters everybody had gotten that we've talked about since we started school?
Yeah, but then he said other things.
Yeah, and he gave power back to the assemblies, the legislative bodies, so they could run their governments like they had before. Because when King James II came in, he just took all that away, didn't he? Because the only colonies we had settled was New England colonies and New York and New Jersey. So he became a dictator, basically, of all those colonies, to the point where people, not only in America, but back at home, hated his guts, revolted, threw him out of office. King William takes over, and he restores all those charters. Remember, a charter gave them the right to go there and kind of do as they had written in each charter. He restored all those back to normal and told the assemblies in each of those colonies, you're back in order. Go do your own thing. Okay? All right. So, how many colonies do we have settled in the middle colonies so far? 2. New York and New Jersey, although New Jersey is kind of master child nobody wants, right? Basically, okay? Have you ever been to New Jersey? Yeah, okay. Well, let's move on to a couple new colonies that are going to get started. Pennsylvania and Delaware. Now look at this. So we've got New York and New Jersey. Here's Pennsylvania, Delaware. Okay, we'll see if we're about ready to get them all taken care of here in the middle colony. Now, we've had a lot of people that have founded colonies in the New World. Roger Williams, John Mason's tried to. A lot of people we've talked about, right? Richard Saltonstall. Well, the one that probably was the most remarkable of all colonial founders was William Penn. William Penn. Probably the most remarkable founders of colonies in the New World was William Penn. What do you know about William Penn? What changed his life? Society of Friends, what are they also known as? Quakers. Okay, first of all, William Penn was the son of an admiral in the Royal Navy. He was the son of an admiral in the Royal Navy. So he came up in a pretty upstanding, popular family. Well, he was raised a certain way, but in 1667, his life changed after he heard his first Quaker sermon. Okay, 1667, William Penn's life changed after hearing his first Quaker sermon. And that happened in 1667. So, the son of an admiral in the Royal Navy, William Penn's life changed after hearing a Quaker sermon one day in 1667. And after hearing this sermon, he became a member of the Society of Friends, often